I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. The first sign was subtle, almost unnoticeable, a missed call here, a text she tilted her phone away to read. I never thought much of it. Emma, my wife of 15 years, had always been social and lively, her laughter filling up any room we entered together. She was the person people wanted to be around, the friend you could call anytime, and she'd always make you feel like the center of the world. I knew this quality was why I had fallen for her all those years ago, and it's what kept me infatuated through everything. We had built a life filled with laughter and warmth, or so I thought. But in the past year, things started to shift. It began as a slight cooling, a distant look that lingered a moment too long. The days stretched into long nights where she'd sit up, her phone glued to her hand, her face illuminated by its glow in the darkened bedroom. She started mentioning work deadlines, saying she had to stay late at the office or grab a drink with clients. I wanted to trust her, to believe that her work was simply demanding more of her time. She had recently taken on a big project with her marketing firm, and I didn't want to be the jealous, overbearing husband. But still, something gnawed at the back of my mind. I shrugged it off, burying myself in my own work to avoid the creeping doubts. I'd started a small IT consultancy years before, and over time, it had grown into a successful business. Between my work and our teenage son's activities, there was always something to focus on, some distraction to keep my mind occupied. Yet every time she came home late or her phone buzzed with a late-night text, I found myself unable to shake the growing suspicion. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but each time, I backed down, telling myself I was being paranoid. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and Emma had mentioned she'd be out late with her team for some kind of work celebration. Our son was at a friend's house for the weekend, so I figured I'd spend the evening catching up on work in the quiet of our empty house. I didn't hear from her until nearly midnight. She sent a brief text, "Don't wait up, staying at a friend's tonight." A strange feeling settled in my chest. This wasn't like her, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I was overreacting. But something about the message felt cold, almost dismissive. I set my laptop aside and decided to check her social media for clues. As I scrolled through her profile, nothing seemed amiss, no new posts, no clues to unravel. But then, a notification caught my eye, a tagged photo from a friend's profile. It was a picture of Emma, dressed to the nines, standing close to a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, her hand lightly resting on his shoulder in a way that felt too familiar. My stomach twisted as I took in the scene, the way she leaned into him, her head tilted, eyes alight with a kind of spark I hadn't seen in a long time. I tried to brush it off as a friendly moment, maybe even an innocent coincidence, but the seed of doubt had been firmly planted. I spent the rest of the night in a haze of worry, unable to sleep, replaying every recent interaction with her, every time she'd brushed me off or cancelled plans. By morning, I had made up my mind, I needed answers. I wouldn't accuse her without proof, but I couldn't continue in the dark. The next few days, I kept my distance, observing. I noticed the way she would slip her phone into her pocket when I entered the room, the way she would smile at messages that she clearly didn't intend to share with me. I started to question everything, every excuse, every work-related outing, every team event that left her giddy and distracted. One night, after she had drifted to sleep, I took her phone from the bedside table. I felt guilty, but I needed to know. My hands shook as I unlocked it, a feat made easy because, after all, we were married. I went straight to her messages and scrolled through, expecting to find nothing, hoping to find nothing. But there it was, a thread that turned my blood cold. Messages between her and a man named Jake. The texts were blatant, with no attempt to hide the affair. My eyes moved over the words, a mix of casual jokes, intimate phrases, and flirtatious exchanges. "Can't wait to see you again," read one of the recent messages. Another, sent just the night before, read, "Tonight was perfect. See you soon." I felt my heart thudding painfully in my chest, each beat a fresh surge of anger and betrayal. I stumbled back from the bed, my mind reeling. Emma stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. I left the room quietly, my hands trembling as I tried to process what I had seen. It was true, she was seeing someone else, and the details of their affair were plain as day, hidden in her phone under my nose. I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. How could she do this to me, to our family? How long had this been going on, and why hadn't I seen it sooner? I spent the night on the couch, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. I tried to piece together the memories, the moments she had been with me while secretly keeping someone else in her life. I felt foolish for not seeing the signs, for letting my trust blind me. By morning, I was resolved. If she could betray me so easily, I wasn't about to let her get away with it. Emma walked into the kitchen that morning, bright and cheerful, acting as if nothing had happened. I watched her with a new sense of clarity, seeing her for the first time as someone I no longer recognized. She poured herself a cup of coffee, humming softly, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, oblivious. I nodded stiffly, unable to look her in the eye. She leaned over to kiss me on the cheek, but I turned away, suddenly unable to bear the thought of her touch. She pulled back, puzzled, but didn't press the issue. For the next few days, I distanced myself, making sure she didn't suspect anything. I was careful, cautious, waiting for the right time. I couldn't simply confront her, I needed a plan. I knew she'd deny it, make excuses, try to deflect. No, I needed something that would leave no room for argument. And then the idea hit me, our anniversary was coming up in a few weeks. We had planned a dinner, nothing fancy, just a gathering with close friends and family. She'd been looking forward to it, blissfully unaware that I knew her secret. It was the perfect opportunity. If she could deceive me for months, I would expose her lies in a way she would never forget. I began to gather evidence, combing through her texts, her emails, even following her once or twice, my heart pounding as I watched her slip into a small cafe, where she would meet Jake. I documented everything, building my case with each detail, every message, every receipt. When the day of our anniversary arrived, I was ready. The days leading up to our anniversary felt like walking on the edge of a cliff, the weight of my plan pressing on me, yet a strange calm settled over me. Every morning, I'd wake up beside Emma, knowing what she had done, knowing what I was about to do. She continued with her life, blissfully unaware, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I watched her closely, observing the little lies, the forced smiles, the casual goodbyes as she left for work dinners, or late meetings. Each one was like a stab to my heart, but I forced myself to remain quiet. I would get my moment. I made all the arrangements for the party, disguising it as an anniversary celebration for friends and family. She seemed thrilled, chatting about it with excitement, mentioning how much she looked forward to it. A few days before the party, she even bought a new dress and made a hair appointment, glowing with an enthusiasm that would have been contagious if not for the fact that I knew the truth. I nodded and smiled as she went on about the evening, watching her bask in the illusion of our perfect marriage, never suspecting what was coming. The night before the party, Emma was in an especially good mood. She hummed to herself as she moved around the house, putting final touches on decorations and even texting a few friends to remind them of the details. I wondered if she had told Jake about the celebration, if he knew that she was still pretending to be a devoted wife. I could barely contain my anger as I thought of him, this stranger who had come between us, the man she had chosen to betray me with. But I knew I needed to stay composed, to keep my focus. Late that night, after she had fallen asleep, I went over my plan one last time. I had prepared a slideshow for the party, a collection of photos and memories from our years together. Only, this wasn't the happy montage she would be expecting. No, this slideshow would reveal the truth, her texts with Jake, the times and dates of their meetings, even a few photos I had managed to take without her noticing. I had made sure to document everything so there would be no way she could deny it. The next day, the house was filled with laughter and chatter as friends and family arrived, everyone excited to celebrate what they believed to be a milestone in our marriage. I greeted each guest warmly, forcing myself to smile and engage in small talk, all the while feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching it all from a distance. Emma was radiant, her new dress accentuating her figure, her laughter filling the room. She looked at me with that practiced smile, and I felt a pang of sadness mixed with anger. This woman, who I had trusted with everything, who I had thought would be by my side forever, was standing here pretending, fooling everyone around us. As the evening progressed, I could feel the tension building within me. Emma made a speech about our marriage, thanking everyone for being there, talking about how much our relationship meant to her. She even looked over at me with those wide, earnest eyes, and for a moment, I almost faltered. Part of me wanted to pull her aside, to confront her privately and avoid the spectacle I had planned. But then I remembered those messages, the lies, the betrayal. I remembered the pain of discovering that everything I had believed in was a sham. No, she deserved this. I deserved this. After her speech, it was my turn. I cleared my throat, feeling a wave of adrenaline wash over me as I stood up and called for everyone's attention. Emma smiled at me from across the room, her eyes shining with pride, completely oblivious to what was coming. I want to thank you all for being here, I began, keeping my voice steady. It means so much to celebrate this night with friends and family. But tonight isn't just a celebration of our marriage. It's also a revelation. A truth I think you all deserve to know. I saw her smile falter, her eyes narrowing slightly in confusion. She tilted her head, a faint line appearing between her brows as she tried to read my expression. I looked directly at her, my heart pounding as I continued. You see, in the past few months, I've learned a lot about love, loyalty, and betrayal. My voice hardened slightly, and the guests exchanged puzzled glances, sensing the tension. Emma's face went pale, her smile completely gone now, replaced by a look of apprehension. I thought that after 15 years of marriage, I knew the woman standing next to me. I thought I could trust her. But as it turns out, I was wrong. I gestured to the screen behind me, and the lights dimmed as the first image appeared. It was a photo of Emma and Jake, the one from the cafe where they had met countless times. There was a collective gasp from the guests, and Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Meet Jake, I said, my voice laced with bitterness. He's been in Emma's life for a while now. Longer than any of us knew. Emma shot up from her seat, her face twisted in shock and fury. What are you doing? She hissed, trying to keep her voice low. But it was too late. The next slide showed their messages, the intimate words they had exchanged, the plans they had made right under my nose. I didn't stop. I clicked through each piece of evidence, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and heartbreak with each new reveal. The room was silent, the guests staring in shock, some of them shifting uncomfortably, unsure of where to look. Emma's face had gone from shock to anger, then to desperation as she realized there was no escaping this. Please, stop, she pleaded, her voice cracking, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. Oh, now you want to talk. I said, my voice filled with bitterness. Now you want to explain. After months of lies, after betraying everything we built together. She looked around the room, her gaze darting from one stunned face to another, her cheeks flushed with shame. I could see her struggling to find the right words, her composure crumbling in front of everyone. I can explain, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Didn't mean for it to happen. I echoed, incredulous. You mean you didn't mean for me to find out? Because that's the only thing you didn't mean, Emma. Everything else. Every message, every lie, every stolen moment. You meant all of that. She started to cry, her shoulders shaking as the weight of the truth bore down on her. I felt a hollow satisfaction watching her unravel, her carefully constructed facade torn apart in front of everyone. But as I looked at her, as I saw the pain in her eyes, I felt a pang of something else, something I hadn't anticipated: sorrow. I had loved this woman. I had trusted her with my heart, my life. And now, as I stood there, watching her world crumble, I realized that a part of me would always mourn the life we had lost, the love that had once been real. But there was no going back now. The damage was done. The silence was suffocating, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their faces etched with shock, pity, and disbelief. Some of them looked at Emma with judgment, others with sympathy, but none of them looked away. She was exposed, laid bare, her secrets out in the open for everyone to see. After what felt like an eternity, I turned to the guests. "Thank you for being here tonight," I said quietly. "I'm sorry it had to end this way. I just thought you all deserved to know the truth." With that, I walked out, leaving Emma standing alone, her tears falling silently as the room filled with whispers and shocked glances. As I stepped outside, the night air hit me, cool and bracing, washing over me like a balm. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift slightly from my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: I was finally free. The days after the party were a blur of shattered memories and tense silences. Emma tried calling, texting, even showing up at my doorstep with a face wet from tears, begging me to let her explain. But I was beyond listening, my heart hardened by the months of lies she had so easily let pass her lips. The moment I had watched her with Jake, seen the way she looked at him in those messages, my love for her had unraveled into something unrecognizable, a mess of anger, betrayal, and the faintest thread of sorrow. But even with all that, I couldn't pretend to ignore the pain, the mourning of a life I had once cherished. I busied myself with paperwork, contacting a lawyer, and trying to keep my focus anywhere but on the fact that my marriage was over. The split itself was surprisingly clean. We'd been careful with our finances and assets over the years, and Emma hadn't fought for anything more than what we'd agreed upon. She had moved out a few days after the party, leaving behind the remnants of our shared life, now little more than memories boxed up and shoved into closets. The house felt empty, too big and too silent, like a hollow reminder of everything we had once shared. The hardest part was our son, Max. He'd been at his friend's house on the night of the party, shielded from the spectacle that had exposed his mother's betrayal. But now, he was caught in the middle, his innocent questions piercing me each time he asked why his mom wasn't coming back home. I struggled to find the right words to explain it to him, to tell him the truth without letting the bitterness slip into my tone. Max was only 14, far too young to be burdened by the complexities of adult relationships. I told him that his mother and I needed some space, that we were going through a tough time but that it had nothing to do with him. I assured him that he was loved, that no matter what happened between his mom and me, he would always have both of us. Max took it harder than I expected, retreating into silence, his once vibrant spirit dulled by the tension that had seeped into our home. I knew he spent time texting his mom, probably trying to make sense of things in his own way. It broke my heart to see him caught in the crossfire, to know that my choice to expose the truth had hurt him, too. But I couldn't undo it. The truth, once out, was like a flood that couldn't be stopped. Days turned into weeks, and gradually, I began to find a rhythm in the solitude. I threw myself into my work, taking on new clients and pouring my energy into growing my business. My routine became a kind of solace, a refuge from the messiness of my personal life. Max spent a few nights each week with Emma at her new apartment, a small place across town, and each time he came back, I could see a mix of emotions in his eyes, as if he were trying to juggle his love for both of us without fully understanding what had torn us apart. One evening, as Max was upstairs working on homework, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally opening the message. "Can we please talk? Just us." For Max's sake. I hesitated, the words stirring a familiar ache in my chest. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to shut her out as she had done to me when she'd chosen to betray our marriage. But Max's face flashed in my mind, his quiet sadness, the way he looked lost between us. I knew I couldn't keep this cold distance forever, not if I wanted my son to feel like he still had a family, even if it was fractured. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet her the next day at a nearby cafe. The place was a neutral ground, busy enough to keep the conversation civil but quiet enough to ensure we wouldn't be interrupted. I arrived early, finding a table in the corner, my stomach twisted in knots as I waited. When she walked in, I felt a strange mixture of resentment and something close to relief. She looked worn down, her usual sparkle dimmed, her face drawn and weary. She saw me and offered a tentative smile, which I did not return. She sat down, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between us. Finally, she broke the silence. "Thank you for meeting me, Mark," she began, her voice quiet. "I know this isn't easy." "Easy?" I scoffed, unable to hold back the bitterness. "You think any of this is easy for me?" "For Max." She flinched, nodding slightly as if she had expected the anger. "I know. And I'm so sorry, Mark. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that. What I did was wrong, and I've had nothing but regret since that night." I looked at her, trying to find some trace of sincerity in her words. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her gaze filled with guilt, but the betrayal still felt too raw, too deep for me to trust anything she said. "I just don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why, Emma? Why would you do this to us? To our family?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair, her shoulders slumping. "It's not an excuse, but I was feeling trapped. Lost. I felt like I was disappearing, like my whole life was about being a wife and a mother, and somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. And then Jake was there, and he made me feel like I was seen again. Like I was wanted." Her words hit me like a punch, stirring a pang of both understanding and anger. I had spent years working hard to provide for our family, to build a future for Max and her. But in her mind, it wasn't enough. She had needed something else, something she couldn't find with me. "So, instead of talking to me, instead of working through it, you decided to betray me? To throw away everything we had built?" My voice shook with barely restrained anger. "Do you know what you've done to Max? He's caught between us, trying to make sense of why his family is falling apart, and you were thinking only about yourself." Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away quickly. "I know, Mark. I know. I was selfish. I didn't think it would hurt so much. And when I realized it, it was too late. I was too far gone. I wish I could go back and undo it all, but I can't." We sat in silence, the bitterness thick between us, years of shared memories crumbling under the weight of her confession. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, trying to find the strength to be civil, if only for Max's sake. "So, what now?" I asked finally. "What do you want from me?" She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I want us to figure out a way to co-parent Max, to make sure he feels loved and supported. I want him to know that even though things didn't work out between us, we still love him." I nodded slowly. Despite the betrayal, I knew she was right. Max didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of our broken marriage. He needed stability, a sense of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. "I agree," I said, my voice softer. "Max deserves to feel like he still has a family, even if it looks different now." She looked relieved, a small, sad smile flickering across her face. "Thank you, Mark. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but, thank you." I didn't respond, the silence between us heavy and final. There was no more to say. Whatever love we had once shared was gone, replaced by a bitter acceptance of what could never be mended. As we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of closure. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it was all still there, but somehow, acknowledging it, facing it head-on, had given me a small measure of peace. I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, that co-parenting with her would test my patience and resolve. But I also knew that I could move forward, that I could rebuild my life, even if it looked nothing like the future I had once imagined. And for the first time since that night, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The months following my meeting with Emma were filled with difficult adjustments. Max had slowly come to terms with our separation, though I could see he was still struggling to understand the full picture. We both did our best to keep things as stable as possible, coordinating schedules, sharing school events, and navigating the awkward reality of co-parenting. I was learning to let go, to focus on what mattered most, Max's well-being and building a future for myself, separate from the life Emma and I had shared. But despite all my efforts to move on, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of my mind. I told myself it was just residual anger or maybe a bit of unresolved hurt. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that something was off, that Emma's betrayal had only been the surface of a much deeper story. One evening, as I was going through some old paperwork, a document caught my eye. It was a receipt from a jewelry store dated several months before the affair came to light. I remembered the night Emma had returned home wearing a delicate gold bracelet, a piece I'd never seen before. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off as a gift from a friend, saying it was just something small to celebrate a promotion at work. But looking at the receipt now, I realized she'd lied. The bracelet had been expensive, the kind of gift you don't just receive from a friend. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to look further into her finances, a move I had avoided before, thinking I didn't want to drag myself deeper into her mess. But as I combed through her records, I found something that made my heart race. There were regular withdrawals from our joint savings account, smaller amounts spread over months, seemingly insignificant until you looked at the pattern. She had been withdrawing money, unaccounted for, under the guise of work expenses or trips with her friends. But now, with everything I knew, it became clear that these transactions had nothing to do with work. The puzzle pieces started to fall into place, each one leaving me more uneasy than the last. What if Jake wasn't the only thing she had been hiding? I began to wonder if her affair was part of something larger, something she hadn't wanted me to uncover. The next day, I took a rare day off from work and drove to the address tied to one of the payments, a small storage facility on the other side of town. I hadn't expected anything significant, maybe just a forgotten piece of our life that she hadn't taken with her. But as I walked down the rows of storage units, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though I were about to open the door to a part of Emma's life I hadn't known existed. I located her unit and, after a short exchange with the manager, convinced him to open it for me, showing him my ID and explaining the situation. With a wary glance, he unlocked the unit, and I pushed the door open, my heart pounding. Inside, the space was dim and cramped, boxes stacked neatly along the walls. I reached for the nearest one, lifting the lid. To my surprise, it was filled with folders, files from her work, pay stubs, receipts, and various legal documents. At first, I thought it was nothing more than a cluttered archive of her work life. But as I flipped through the papers, I stumbled upon a file labeled Inheritance. I remembered Emma telling me about her late aunt's inheritance a few years back, a modest sum that she had put away for a rainy day. She had assured me that it was under control, that it was a small amount meant for emergencies. But the document in my hand told a different story. The inheritance wasn't modest, it was substantial, enough to buy a second property. I stared at the figure, my mind reeling. Why hadn't she told me? What had she been planning to do with this money? I moved through more boxes, and as I dug deeper, I found photographs, but not of our family or of vacations. These were photos of her and Jake in various places, as well as other people I didn't recognize. Emma looked relaxed, comfortable, and in one particular image, there was an unmistakable closeness between her and another man, a face that, as I looked closer, began to look disturbingly familiar. It was a face I recognized from family gatherings, from the company holiday parties, and from random encounters that had seemed harmless at the time. The man in the photo was one of my clients, a well-known businessman I had worked with several years ago, someone who often consulted my IT firm for confidential projects. And yet, here he was, laughing alongside Emma in what seemed to be a casual yet intimate setting. I rifled through more photos, my hands shaking, trying to piece together the meaning of it all. Why would Emma be associating with one of my clients outside of work? And how had I never noticed? Then it hit me. Emma's affair with Jake had been the perfect cover, a smokescreen to distract me from something far more calculated. She hadn't just been hiding a romantic affair, she had been planning something far bigger, something that involved my business and potentially my client's secrets. I felt sick as the realization dawned. She had been using her access to my clients, to our shared finances, and even to my trust, leveraging it all in some larger scheme I hadn't even begun to understand. I grabbed one last file from the bottom of a box, opening it with dread. Inside, there were bank statements in Emma's name, connected to an offshore account. The transactions listed were in amounts that matched the withdrawals from our savings, amounts that had been slowly accumulating over the past year. I felt my blood run cold as I pieced together the timeline, realizing she had been funneling money into this hidden account for months, if not years. Suddenly, everything made sense. Emma had never intended to stay with Jake. He was just a pawn, someone she had used as a way to distract me while she orchestrated something far more sinister. And now, as I held the evidence of her deception in my hands, I felt an overwhelming wave of both anger and betrayal. But I knew one thing for sure, Emma hadn't planned for me to find this. She had thought I'd be too focused on her affair, too consumed by my anger to look any deeper. She hadn't expected me to uncover the full extent of her betrayal, to realize that our entire marriage had been nothing more than a well-constructed lie. I left the storage unit that day with a plan forming in my mind, a plan that would finally put an end to her schemes. I would gather everything, every file, every transaction, and take it straight to the authorities. Emma had used me, manipulated me, and destroyed our family for her own gain. But now, the tables had turned. That night, as I sat in my quiet house, I looked around, feeling the empty space fill with a strange sense of satisfaction. For once, I was the one holding the cards. Emma had thought she could outsmart me, but she had underestimated the depth of my resolve. The next morning, I called my lawyer, filing for sole custody of Max and initiating the process to turn over all of Emma's hidden finances and offshore accounts to the authorities. I knew that once I set things in motion, there would be no going back. Emma would be forced to face the consequences of her choices, the betrayal she had so carefully orchestrated now working against her. As I hung up the phone, a sense of finality settled over me. I had lost my marriage, but I had regained my freedom. And in the end, that was worth more than anything Emma had taken from me.